So welcome, Said, to this conversation about the third attractor.
Thank you, Danielle.
Where,
I'm happy to be here.
yeah, I'm happy to have you. And probably the first question, are you familiar with the term the third attractor? And
I've
if yes, can you give us a short, your understanding of what we mean or what one means with the third attractor?
yeah. Well, it goes by different names,
Yeah, yeah, it does.
In reading about it and finding the general description of it, it really fits in with my work with my newest form of work, which is Second Sapiens and what that entails. So it really is about, to me, it's about embracing the idea that we just can't sit around and watch things collapse or, have them go into the hands of autocrats or dictators,
Hmm.
the movement between control and chaos uh, is not enough as a dynamic to really determine the future of humanity and what happens with our environment and the all the human built systems. To me, there needs to be a calling for people in leadership and people who have different ideas and models about the evolution of consciousness, the evolution of people and cultures, and
Hmm.
for them to contribute to really designing a better world. So really, as you said in your initial email to me, it goes by different names, but for the people who are in the know about the different things that we're challenged with, it is a call to wake up and try to do something about it, regardless of whether dynamics are pushing you this way or that way. We have a sense of responsibility to do the right things because it's people like us, people with higher consciousness who are aware of collapse happening before other people accept it.
Hmm.
Chaos happening as we experience it. We experience it, I think, at a higher level of knowledge, at a higher spiritual vibration, and it behooves us to do something about it. So that's really where I come from it. I mean, and this whole idea of this came to me maybe about 8 or 9 years ago when I started thinking about what my next book was going to be. And as you know,
Hmm.
Danielle, I'm a student of spiral dynamics. I'm a Gravesian at heart, meaning that I follow a developmental model that says, once you can't solve the problems with the tools that you have to start seeking different higher level tools. And when we were constantly being bombarded by the chaos of the VUCA, or whatever it was called back in the mid 2010s, the environmental issues that we were dealing with, and we couldn't fit them into really the existing model. It really presented a challenge to me to say, look, we're talking about the possible collapse of the greater holonic structure that contains all
Hmm.
life. It's not about human build systems anymore. That is the smaller structure contained within that higher system that is in collapse. So,
Hmm.
to myself, it was the greatest challenge to expand my horizon and begin to look at things more from a turquoise science, if you will, from a perspective of the what might have served us so far as a humanity might have helped in getting us to eliminate some of the diseases and getting us to really live better lives and more successful lives. But the ubiquity of that is also now causing the problems that we have with the planet. And so
Exactly.
there has to be either, we can't, I mean, this is, as you know, this is a transcend and include model, meaning that we really can't give up all the benefits that that science has given us. The whole idea of the Enlightenment age and all the benefits that it provided us. We need to harness as much of that as we can, but we can't allow it to get to the point that it's to where it's already gotten to affect the planetary systems that are beginning to create the greater threat for all life on the planet. So to me, it was a call to explore those higher realms, specifically the higher sciences that will save the planet from collapse, and in the process save all life forms on the planet. So this is my calling. This is how I relate to the third attractor. I call it second sapiens, but
Yeah,
nevertheless,
yeah.
there are a million names for it, and at its core, to me, it is a call for people who are in the know, who have the consciousness and the awareness that as a humanity, we have a responsibility to do something. Although the people who hold power are not there yet, we have the responsibility of informing them. We have the responsibility of creating the smaller systems that if collapse comes, that at least what we work on has a chance to come and define the next emerging system.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I like what you say about us taking responsibility. I was talking with my sister today and told her about the third attractor. She hadn't heard that term. She's in a different world a little bit. And her immediate response was, "But isn't the biggest problem today that people are mainly uh, indifferent?" I think that's the English word, indifferent. They don't care.
Right.
And she felt, and I think that that's a very valid point. She said something like, "I don't feel like people feel attracted either to chaos or authoritarianism. They are just indifferent. They feel powerless. They feel victimized. They feel like I cannot do anything anyway." And that's what I see as the main problem. And it made me think that this is a very interesting point, and also points to the fact that we all have to take more responsibility, no? To change something to the better. And it seems like such a big task.
Yeah. Well, it is, and your sister is not that far off. People become passive, Daniela, in my opinion, because they relied too much on our leaders. They relied too much on the systems that we put in place that had checks
Hmm.
and balances. And so we never worried about whether, a political, entity is going to collapse or whether, current leadership is going to, not live up to its expectations from the people that it represents. That the current chaos being caused by AI and the whole digital disruption that we're experiencing, where people are losing jobs left and right, and you get a number of oligarchs telling you, oh, no, 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 there'll be other jobs. Well, there are not going to be other jobs. This is people who really know how, the disruption being caused by the digital age, the impact of
Hmm.
that. I mean, that's going to have, we're not ready for the outcome that that's going to produce. If people are out of work and they haven't really created the new system that will, utilize what the next thing for them is, in a system that still requires people to have jobs just to be able to pay their bills.
Yeah,
I mean, what kind of a society are we looking at? It seems like we're heading, at least here in the States, we're heading towards a system where there's very little government support, when in reality we need the opposite. We're heading into
yeah,
chaotic
yeah,
times, not only change to the digital age, but change with the disasters that we're experiencing with climate change. This requires a greater degree of government engagement, a government that has empathy, that sees people for who they are, yet we're heading the other way. And so the
hmm,
best way for people is exactly to as to what your sister observed, is that be passive and not engaged, and just let chaos happen the way it's happening, and let the
hmm,
chips fall where they may, if you will. And that
yeah,
my kids are the same way. I have two daughters, 31 and 33, and they're the same way. They don't want to, they're like, we're living our lives. We don't engage in too many controversial things, and it's like, you either trust the system or you stay away from it. and
yeah,
and 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 trusting the system is not an active thing for the younger generation. That's what I observed with my kids. It's like, oh no, yeah, politicians and leaders, those are ceremonial things. We don't care about them. But in their absence, you sooner or later we're all going to feel it.
yeah, yeah. And they still want to live a good life, no? I mean,
Yeah,
the young
yeah.
generation, and they have a right to live a good life and have a future. Where do you see the biggest planetary challenges? I know that in your book you describe a set of nine of the big planetary
Yeah, well,
catastrophes that
well,
should.
that's that's my research. That's not my own work, but it
Yeah,
is. I look at this, Daniela, from perspective of holonic structures, and the largest holon that contains all life is the planet and her planetary systems.
yeah,
And if any of those systems are collapsed, or in collapse, just because of the sheer size of the system and the degree of complexity it contains, once you get one system in collapse, it begins to cascade on other systems and cause them to collapse. But it's so the issue is no longer about that single thing of the carbon footprint. It's not
Hmm.
about how much carbon dioxide we're putting in the air. We're talking about we have passed the boundaries, the safe boundaries of nine, well, of the nine known systems that have been uncovered by scientists in the last couple of decades, we have passed the safe boundaries of six. We're talking about, the disappearance of resources. We're talking about, the loss of biodiversity, the degree to which we're still, making our oceans more acidic, the degree to which we're dumping chemicals in our fresh water supplies. The latest thing is that we have uh, gone past the boundaries of the fresh water we need for air, for to water our agriculture. I mean,
Hmm.
it's impending on every aspect of that bigger holonic structure where chaos is happening at such a higher degree because of the complexity of the system that very few people know it. I mean, I make the case that we are now completely at the mercy of Mother Nature because so many of these systems are in collapse, yet the science isn't there to give us a better understanding of it. And even when it gets to you know to be that, leaders don't want to hear it, because it's something so foreign to us that we haven't really absorbed the full understanding of what it means to be in the middle of climate collapse. We are at the mercy of Mother Nature, meaning that uh, collapse is not going to happen tomorrow. Climate, it might, one day, Europe is fine one summer, and then 3 summers later, you get 47 degrees in Barcelona. You know, it's
Yeah, yeah.
it's that random. It's that complex that it's not predictable through the current lens of science that we look at, and it's primarily the orange science that we see the world through. The level 5 of human development. When these issues are issues of the eighth level system, meaning the problems of the turquoise system in spiral dynamics. You recall the model. It's life conditions and adaptive intelligence, where life conditions are telling us, hey, I'm the planet here and I'm in collapse. I need this level of intelligence to solve the problem. But the intelligence is,
Hmm. It's
and
far down.
yeah, yeah. And then
Yeah,
the
yeah.
few scientists that are up here are telling us, these are the things that you need to do. We gotta cut this. I mean, we have to have a complete change in lifestyle that will allow us to at least gain the breathing room to understand how Mother Nature works better. I mean, we're talking about complexity science that changes daily, that changes, by the time the traditional scientific methods are vetted, everything that you've known, if you're studying climate change, becomes obsolete by the time, a certain scientific method gets approved and peer reviewed and published and all that. You know, Mother Nature moves at exponential pace, and that's what we need to
Hmm.
either take a step back and say, okay, we need to we based on what we've seen so far, it seems like nothing we're doing is slowing down the pace of environmental collapse. Maybe we should take a step back till we gain a better understanding of the science, to gain the trust and the and you know and the capacities of people in power who can do something about this. But none of this is happening. And you see so much of the people who are like the planet criers that are saying, hey, this is happening, something's going to be done about it, yet no one's doing anything about it. So this is, my call is to empower those sciences of the eighth stage of development but not only from the scientific perspective, because once you get into that second tier, once you get into the integral stage and above, science itself becomes very integrated.
Hmm.
It becomes interdisciplinary, it becomes intersubjective, it becomes intuitive, it includes a lot of aspects of who we are as a humanity. It includes a
Yeah.
lot of the intuition, the I mean, spiritual, some of the spirituality, but it is a different form that is far more superior than what we've known science to be. It's very, right now science is orange and very innocuous, and it excludes so much of the natural element of it that it's not natural anymore. So how do you expect a system to have been so, regimented and reduced to anticipate what's going to happen with a natural system as big as the planetary systems? So that's really the core of my argument in Second Sapiens, is that we need to move to a stage of development that really begins to answer the chaos that is emerging. And there are three things that are chaotic. The biggest one is, of course, climate change. But then you're talking about the collapse of the post World War II world order. We've
Yeah.
taken that for granted, as if, we decided to end wars against each other, but we forget that collectively, because of this thing called peace through commerce, that we wanted to make the entire world into a capitalist society, that just by those pursuits, we have turned our guns towards Mother Nature. And so
Mhm.
that paradigm is beginning to die. You can only, if the entire world becomes a consumer society, what's next? What's, you force these models on countries that don't have the capacities, the developmental capacities to implement them, and suddenly you're creating a very severe disadvantage to these people. Look at what's happening with third world countries. That post World War II financial infrastructure gave us the World Bank and the IMF and all the banking institutions that are global in nature to lend money to third world countries to develop. But if the leader is someone who's somewhat of a tyrant, they take that money for themselves. They misappropriate so many things. Corruption is endemic, and
Mm.
in many countries that want to develop, but then these corrupt leaders take that money, and because of the lack of capacity to develop as quickly as the West wants them to develop, they default into a life of perpetual debt. Many of these
Yeah,
third
yeah,
countries can barely service the debt on their loans that was given them to develop. And so it's, instead of having the effect of them being developed and on the road to becoming a more evolved, at least economically and socially, a more developed society, it's having the reverse effect. If a government is perpetually uh, giving the majority of its productive output towards servicing debt on loans, I mean, where's the inspiration for them to be lifted coming from? So
yeah,
all these things are like are coming to a head, and coalescing, if you will, to what I call the great obsolescence. And it is these three things that are happening all together at once. But then, the rest of my book focuses on, well, how do we get out of these? How do we create better models to move us into, the third attractor, to move us into a space where we can save humanity? And it really, at the heart of it, Daniela, is the idea that we made ourselves, with the emergence of the Age of Enlightenment, we made ourselves the apex of the evolutionary ladder. We appointed
mhm,
ourselves in charge. We became
mhm,
our own gods, basically. That's
mhm,
very proprietary to the orange system. I analyze, therefore I am. And at the core of our problems is that it took Mother Nature 13 billion years to give us the autobiosis that we enjoy today. The you know
mhm.
the balance that happens, automatically. And in 100 years, we've destroyed it. I mean, imagine the destructive power of this movement, away from wars, but more towards consumption and using up the planet's resources. It's just, the whole idea of it is asinine, and very few people look at this. I mean, people, I'm part of the system. We're all part of the system. We enjoyed it to a certain point. But now that very same system is telling you, the foundation on which this thing is built is collapsing. And part of that collapse is the idea that you may never have what you had before. And so there's the call for different ways of thinking, the calls of bringing back intelligence and having it be nested in natural systems,
Mhm.
biomimicry, if you will. We have to really study how Mother Nature behaves. The biggest part of the difference between human intelligence and natural intelligence is that we're very selective on how we decide something is important. We extract best practices from something through our orange lenses, but we throw what we extract to the environment. And we have done that for 70, 80 years to the point that, whatever we have extracted is now appearing to us as a fate, as the idea that, unless you account for the feedback loops, coming
Yeah,
from every action has an opposite. It's as simple as that. Every action has an opposite and equal reaction. But in our ambition to become happy and wealthy, I mean, all relative terms based on, how the enlightened mind works. In us pursuing that kind of a consumer life, we have thrown away the feedback loop that says, you extract this from the environment and, it's going to affect the waterways. It's going to,
yeah,
eventually add up to environmental degradation that if everybody, adopts the model that you want them to adopt, it'll get to a critical point where it's going to affect the future of all living things on the planet. And so this is the coming the full circle of understanding the consequences of our actions. And it all has to do with feedback loops. Mother Nature does not leave out a single feedback loop that says, if you don't water your flowers in the morning, they're going to die. It's
yeah,
simple as that. If you adopt that model to every action that we take, we'll become a far better humanity.
yeah, yes. And I have like five different questions going through my head. Let's sort this out. One question is obviously, where do you see the pathway to the third attractor or to a different world? Like very concretely, what needs to happen? But before that, I would like to ask you a more detailed question about that is also very much connected to spiral dynamics and to the stages. Because what I often wonder is, and I live here in India, and India is just in the process of going from blue to orange with a little bit of post-modernity blinking up in the big cities with the young
Yeah.
people. But there is a lot of orange, and there is a lot of the same striving for money, for wealth, for becoming somebody. Yeah, like the parents want the students to be very uh, yeah, good students in school so that they can become doctors and lawyers and like there is the orange striving is very much in the culture here.
Of course. Yeah.
And then I have friends that say, yeah, but that's just and only because of the Western influence. That's just because the West has shown this potential, and therefore countries like India or China are just mimicking now what the
Yeah.
West did. And I'm curious what you think about this question, because I myself am not convinced that we can just put it on the West, because living here with Indians and seeing how it's not that I feel like, oh, they look to America and see what America has and therefore they strive.
Yeah.
It's more like this inherent moving from blue to orange with all that was involved in the West too, but some years ago. And now India goes through exactly the same steps.
Yeah.
And I wonder, on one hand, they have all the right of the world to go through the same, to get
Yeah.
more wealth and have a better life and have better health care and have a lot of the amenities that we are used to. And on the other hand, it's very clear that this is also not sustainable when a
Yes.
huge country like India and China, it's kind of these big countries that are developing now in exactly the same direction, seem to make exactly the same mistakes as we made. So
Yeah.
it's looking at this, it's overwhelming on one hand, and I really wonder what is the pathway then, because it
Well,
has to be global solutions, no?
yes, yes, absolutely. So solutions that will save us from the predicament that we're in has to be, if not immediately global, at least quickly scalable to become global.
Yeah.
And really, Daniela, therein lies the problem because what you just talked about is viewed as a rites of passage for any emerging country. We've embedded in the psyche of humanity the idea that in order for you to leave your subsistent agrarian existence, in the past and really become a modern culture who, not only adopts the Western lifestyle, but also, embraces science, embraces mathematics, embraces the notion of what drives the orange system, the
Yeah.
idea that, we have enough psychosocial capacities to uncover the secrets of the universe through science, through research and development, through providing, better lives for ourselves, for our children, and so forth. Well, the West was the first to go through that. I
Yeah.
mean, we experienced the Industrial Revolution, 250, 300 years ago, and we have encouraged the rest of the world to follow in our footsteps. And it's like it was an undeclared, business model for the world, so to speak. But it also became a path for modernity. It became a path for a better life. And so as countries emerge into it, they look at it as, all of a sudden, because of the destruction that you as Western countries have caused to our planet, you want to stop us from experiencing this rite of
Yeah.
passage. And so I think, and again, I hate to take a green perspective on this, but I think the West owes it to the rest of the world to really take responsibility for this. It's like, if you look cumulatively at what has been causing climate change, we've been, polluting the earth for 250 years. Suddenly, the BRICS come along, and that organization of countries that want to create a force, against the West. They just started emerging 20 years ago, 20, 25 years ago,
Mhm.
and they want to become a force on their own, and to try to compete economically and in every other way with the West, and yet they want to be stopped. I think it behooves the West to create sustainable technologies to continue on the path of saying, look, yes, we take responsibility. No one's stepping up to the plate to do it yet, but we take responsibility
Yeah.
for everything that we've done in the last 200 years. And as a result, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create sustainable technologies that will bypass the idea that you have to go through the industrial age, the dirty and the filthy, productive processes of the industrial age that add to the carbon footprint, that add, uh, uh, someone born into modernity, Daniela, consumes 100 to 200 times of what our
I know.
ancestors did less than 200 years ago. And so just
Yeah.
by being born into the idea that, I want to become modern instead of staying in a remote village in the mountains of South America or in the jungles of Africa, the idea that I want to pursue modernity, the notion itself creates the notion that you're going to consume 200 times more of the resources than your ancestors did. And so we need to figure out a way where these people, these emerging countries think that they have the rite of passage to those values. We have to accommodate that. We can't stop them. We can't, modernity is something that people pursue. It's just its carbon footprint, its material footprint, its ecological footprint has to be minimized. And
Yeah.
that becomes the responsibility of the West, in my opinion. And we're not
Yes, I
doing
agree. And at the same time, we cannot romanticize the agricultural lifestyle that these big countries in certain areas still live, because th th I feel like this is such a big discussion point, because some people feel like if we just all stopped, or these people here, I live really in rural India, yeah,
Mhm.
and if we just would see how beautiful life they have, and they are still so connected to nature, and everything is so beautiful, and I can see that this is a romanticizing of something that is not true. Like this, they have a very hard life. Women are not treated well. uh, it's hard to get to have children and bring them up in a positive way. So it's we have to find a way that is not going back like the famous pre-trans fallacy, no?
Right.
Because
Yeah.
I don't think that is the solution. And people who romanticize this rural Indian Chinese village life, I think they are wrong. In 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 the context in which we live today, it's not a solution to stop everything and say, okay, let's just all go back to this very archaic
Yeah.
lifestyle, no?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. What you're describing, Daniela, is the archaic form of purple that
Yeah.
existed historically. I mean, humanity was sustained for 40,000 years based on purple agrarian values where, a the difference in income and standard of living between a son and a grandson was minimal.
Yeah.
I mean, there wasn't that motivation to want to accumulate wealth and become a modernized. I mean, the motivation wasn't there, but it also comes with the things that you talked about. It also comes with the mistreatment of women. It also comes that is purple that is emerging in a patriarchal culture. But what
Mhm.
we need to do, see, to me, and this is why I go into so much of exploring very little areas of what Graves wrote, post academic career. He introduced a concept of called 6 upon 6 hypothesis, which says that the values in every tier, the values
Yeah.
in the emerging tier repeat but at an exponentially
Yeah.
higher level. So when beige is about the survival of the individual in the jungle, yellow, which will be the first stage in the second tier, is also about survival, but it's not about the individual anymore. It's about the survival of all life on the planet.
Mhm.
Similarly, in turquoise, turquoise is a repeat of purple, but it's not
Mhm.
the archaic purple that we just talked about. It is the
Mhm.
far more complex uh, purple in the form of turquoise that is exponentially smarter. So it's like the
Yeah.
return after we've learned everything there is to learn through our journey so far, and
Yeah.
saying, yes, this is how life looks like. Yes, regenerative agriculture is part of that system, but it's not just regenerative agriculture. I mean, this is essential for the planet to replenish the soils, to allow Mother Nature to help us. All we need to do is do this much, and if Mother Nature is still, has mercy towards us, she'll do the rest. And so that's a part of it. But we need to also think about, what does regenerative culture look like? What does the idea of, the entire global trade system look like? Does it exist in the future? And in my opinion, it shouldn't. The whole
Mhm.
idea of creating what Don calls ecologically aligned humanity on a planet with limited resources. We're talking about global villages. We're talking about entirely sufficient global villages that are maybe scientific in nature, that have brought all the values that came with our emergence into purple, all the way up to from beige all the way up to turquoise.
Mhm.
Bring those things with us, but begin to view them from the idea that collapse is hanging over our heads. That the idea that we can, go on a what Graves calls this self-aggrandizing journey of pillaging every resource there is. We can't do that anymore. Mother Nature has proven that, our behavior has decoupled from her ability to regenerate what we need. So it
Mhm.
becomes an alignment with that. So how do you align the culture? How do you align governance? How do you align our educational systems? How do you align, the family structure?
Yeah.
In the past, there wasn't concern about environment. Families in the purple stage would have 10 or 12 kids. The sole reason for these kids is to have added hands on the land so they can have a
And
success.
many died.
And many,
And
yes.
many died.
Yes, well,
Yeah.
we're coming back to that from a different perspective. It's 2.3 is the magic number for kids to replace us as it keeps.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you read some of the research, it's scary stuff, Daniela. It looks like, Graves predicted in 74 that in order for us to get into the integral stage, half of the population would have to disappear just because of our inability to sufficiently allocate resources, over.
Oh.
So, but that is being confirmed by science now. Those scientists, that's why they get depressed. That's why they're like, hell with this. No, leaders are not listening to us. But the science shows that to continue our lifestyle the way we've had it, we're going to need 2.5 planets by 2050.
Yeah.
We don't have 2.5 planets. You know, to the whole idea that you can we can just consume and then explore the idea that we can live on Mars. I mean, how stupid is that? You know, so this whole notion that we
Are
can
you the yeah? Are you saying, or is in your thinking, reduction of population is part of what needs to happen? I'm not meaning somebody is killing
uh,
people, but in general, a reduction over time so that
it, yeah,
the
it's not going
planet
to
can
happen.
sustain the
It's not
number
going
of
to happen
people.
voluntarily, Daniela. Just like, the idea of rites of passage, for people to stop having, I mean, people have many kids for several reasons. I mean, for God's sake, the Kennedys here in the United States, Robert Kennedy himself had 13 kids, it's the
Really?
Catholic ethic, it's we have the Mormon ethic, they have 8 or 9 kids. It's
Yeah.
in big parts of the cultures that are in that form of a restrictive blue, with the idea that we need to have more kids to spread the religion, or even in purple, still people, like in the Arab world, they've experienced
Mhm.
incredible wealth, but they still have large families. So it's not going to happen voluntarily. People still look at that as an expression of their rites of passage, and
Yeah.
for that change to happen, it really needs to be at a structural, profound level that shifts the values. And I think what's going to cause that to happen are natural disasters. I'm sorry to be a pessimist on this, but it is, unless we begin to realize the extent to which natural disasters are going to dominate our future, that where the possibility of, like, the Midwest here in the United States today being the breadbasket of the country, that it's going to be desert within 50 years. Okay. And the way we're, dealing politically with our partners, where are we going to get agriculture if we alienate our Mexican neighbors to the south? They have fertile land. If what scientists expect to happen with our Midwest, where's the fertile land that the United States is going to get its agriculture from? It's these
Mhm.
things that people need to become aware of, that you need the consciousness in that exists, and it's among small communities. And what these communities, they're becoming regenerative on their own. So we're building smaller communities that have this turquoise awareness that
Mhm.
is afoot, and we need to begin to plan as if well, it is already happening. It's just the awareness, the ubiquitous awareness of it isn't there yet. But as more disasters rise, the awareness of it becomes more and more known by everybody in the planet. So it is going to be something that will tremendously curtail the way we intend to continue our lives. As of now, half of LA burns down, 6,000 homes destroyed, 12,000 people, don't have homes. It happens, it's on the news for a week, and then we forget about it. But
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you drive up the coast and there's destruction everywhere. It looks like a nuclear
Mhm.
weapon was dropped on the community. It's but when these start happening in increasing frequencies, it inevitably it's going to hit your own community. Inevitably, it's going to be a wake-up call for the politician who can't answer questions for their local communities on why the government cut resources, when it's needed the most for them to engage in these essential rescues that are being, the cause of which is climate change. So that form of chaos is hasn't even begun yet, and the net result
Oh,
of that is additional chaos that's going to result in death of people. It's just, those
yeah.
dynamics
Yeah.
aren't those dynamics to really do something collectively aren't there yet.
So, but my question then is, I agree with every word that you're saying, but isn't it also true that in crisis, in catastrophes, people tend to think smaller? And I hear you say, in a way, that needs to happen. The communities have to think about how they want to change their own ways. But I also heard you speak about the need of global solutions. And my fear is that the more of these catastrophes happen and the more the countries struggle with their own catastrophes and their own difficulties, the less they are able and willing to come out of their shell and look for global solutions together with other countries. So this for me seems to be almost a contradiction. Like the worse the world is getting, the more I see like, and you see that already with America First, no, with your president and
Yeah,
movements all over the places where countries feel like, okay, we close our boundaries now because we have enough to do with looking after our own things. We cannot be uh, responsible for the whole globe.
right, right.
And at the
So yeah,
same time, I think we need a way for some top down action too. Yeah, it feels like it has to come from bottom up and top down. And where I struggle to see solutions is top down. How that people really can come together and find
yeah,
kind of this global solutions that would be needed.
yeah. No, I agree with you. You know, it seems like the human built systems are already contracting, you know, without awareness of, you know, there's a far greater contraction that would probably take place that will put the actions that we're taking, like what the US government is doing here, like the movement towards, you know, shutting down borders and
Mm,
empowering nationalism, you know, the disasters that will be caused by Mother Nature that will add to that contraction are, you know, will make this look like it's a walk in the park. You know, we're
yeah.
talking about uh, disasters of the proportions that um, current governments cannot withstand. The idea
Mm,
that, you know, in order for you to rescue a community of, you know, people in distress because of climate change, you cannot do it because not it's not in the budget. That 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 cannot that cannot stand anymore. You know, we're talking about
mm,
the lives of people. So we're beginning to see, uh, you know, the nature of these problems impinge on the limits of the current systems that we've created in how humanity would operate in peaceful times. We never made
mm,
contingencies to, you know, we made contingencies, okay, how do we operate in times of war? And then how do we operate in times of peace? But we haven't really made contingencies on how do we operate in a space where continuous natural disasters are going to happen. You know, and this is really, you know, while governments become protective from, you know, everything that you talked about, from you know, immigration, border control, the idea that, you know, generous social programs are, you know, being given to everybody where it's taxing the,
mm.
those are going to be nothing compared to the kind of funding that governments need just to address their own problems caused
Yeah.
by ecological collapse. You know, we're gonna every country, rich or poor. I mean, the first countries, unfortunately, that are gonna suffer the most are the poor countries.
Mm,
They don't have their own resources to deal with this, and as they reach out to the West is going to be preoccupied with its own, you know, its own disasters, its own ability to answer to its own people. So it's like all the structures that we're looking at that have been man-made are under stress to the point that we have to start building the next system. And no one, you know, very few people seem to be focused on that. You know, the next system is going to be like nothing that we've seen before. You know, during wartime, you know, governments, you know, enact, you know, spending measures that go beyond, you know, balanced budget. We're talking about the idea that, you know, modern money, the way we view it, is not going to matter anymore. We're talking
mm,
you know, devastation of scales that we haven't seen before. And so therein comes the idea that we need to start building resilient local communities where the reliance on much of what we have taken for granted as a modern creation for, you know, for finance, for you know, for governance, for all that needs to be at the almost at the micro scale, needs to be at the community
mm,
scale, you know, and that's really the challenge. I mean, if we're resilient at the local level, you know, you talk about you know, how people, you know, come together in times of disasters and they think small, but what do you do with the built environment? What do you do with a
yeah.
the size of a city, you know, the size of LA, 8 million people? Yeah, they're local environments there, but it's a, our entire global infrastructure has been built on modernity. How do you deal
Mhm.
with that? How do you make cities more resilient? How do you make, the work of Marilyn Hamilton comes to mind? How do you create integral city that are alive? And so that becomes the issue. We're doing it slowly, but are we doing it quickly enough to accommodate what's coming? And very few people can gauge what's coming because we haven't empowered the science that will tell us what's coming.
Or they don't believe it. Isn't
Oh
it
yeah.
strange? Isn't it strange that people like Jordan Peterson, for example, are strong advocates to saying there is nothing like human-made climate change. This is bullshit. And I, I mean, I hear that, and I feel like if we live in a world where even really intelligent people, people that I consider intelligent, can have a different opinion about where we are going in that respect, and how important it would be to save the planet, then I feel like, what can we do then? I mean, if not even, it would be a first step that everybody would agree, yeah, it is really bad and we have to do something together. But there are really big voices that say, no, no, it's not that bad, and we cannot do this, we cannot do that, and we should not put fear into people because that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I feel, yeah, probably we should put more fear in people so that they would wake up to what actually is happening, no?
Daniela, I just want to share with you an experience I had a few months ago. I was doing a presentation about my book, and towards the end, people felt, although I spend a few chapters on what we can do to mitigate, all the collapse that's taken place, um, the people in the audience was left with the idea that collapse is inevitable, and that we
Mm-hmm.
need to begin to work on how to address this collective trauma that we're going to experience. And so
Mm-hmm.
we ended that session, everybody going into groups and talking about in a somewhat of a, I mean, I sensed that it was, the the mood was of depression, you know.
Yeah.
But then the next day, I get a call from the people who put the whole thing together. It says, Saeed, you won't believe the kind of solutions that we came up with overnight. The kind of
Wow.
that what you talked about became a trigger for us to begin to think differently.
Mm.
So, when you say that, we see it, but we ignore it, or we're too afraid to address it, it needs to be addressed. It needs to be brought up saying, look, disasters are going to happen. This is, the likes of Jordan Peterson saying the things that he does is realized in orange. Maybe with now heavy on the religious blue a little bit, but he is someone in that orange system where optimism and humanistic psychology play a big role in keeping us
Mm-hmm.
positive and happy all day. Well, you know what? You look at Mother Nature, and according to my friend Howard Bloom, she she ain't sympathetic towards our species anymore.
No. Did you read his last book?
Oh, his last book, yeah, funny story. I asked him to. He's of course a friend of Don's, and he did a lot of presentations at the Spiral Dynamics training, and him and I met several times, and so I emailed him to see if he would write the foreword to my book. He says,
Yeah.
absolutely, Saeed, send me the book, and so he reads it in like 4 days. 580 pages. He reads it in 4 days. And he calls. He goes, Saeed, um, I'm afraid I can't write the foreword to your book because I have a book that comes out that doesn't give Mother Nature as much credit as you give her. Is that okay? I said, absolutely.
Exactly.
Can we still be friends? I said, okay. So yeah, I read
Yeah.
it. I
Yeah.
probably do a footnote a page. He does 3 footnotes per page, and so the
Yeah.
citation section is bigger than the narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's one of the few geniuses out there who really has his pulse on what turquoise science looks like. I mean, he gets into the,
Mm,
the even the cosmic aspect of things,
mhm, mhm.
and very few people have that perspective, and we need to know more and more of what that larger science, what Ken Wilber calls the wide, no, he calls orange sciences the narrow sciences, and the any other form of science as the wide science, or
Yeah,
but this is this is where we need to move beyond orange thinking. This is where we
yeah,
need to incorporate the subjective, the interdisciplinary, the transdisciplinary, the intuitive, all that needs to be a part of it.
yeah.
And we really, it's not like, we're creating things out of nothing. All we have to do is begin to understand how Mother Nature works, begin to mimic how certain aspects of Mother Nature's behaviors are as a way for her to reach, symbiosis with its environment, with all the living elements that live in harmony. You know,
Mhm.
it's
But do
it,
you see this kind of turquoise scientists out there? Do you know of
well,
scientists that have the capacity to do what you have in mind here?
everybody who writes about climate change and comes to the same conclusion I do is part of that. You're
Yeah.
talking about, Elizabeth Colbert, who wrote the book about the sixth extinction, a book that has gotten over 5,000 five-star reviews. She was interviewed a few months ago by
Hmm.
the Gates Foundation, who were interviewing people on their opinion of what they thought of the sustainability practices that, the Gates Foundation and all other people support. And they wanted to know her opinion. And she said, yeah, I can't comment sufficiently on the nature of the technology and the solutions that you have. But the only thing you should keep in mind is the scale of the solution has to be congruent with the scale of the problem, meaning that whatever you create, it cannot be created through traditional way that scientific concepts have been created, and if you're looking to use a new technology like an alternative to solar panels, or or some, it cannot go through market mechanisms anymore. It needs to be
Hmm.
deployed as soon as possible. So you get
Hmm.
people like her that are there. There are people who are studying, the how the polar ice is melting. People who are environmental scientists are in that science. I mean, we just ignored him because we took, Mother's Nature's heaven on earth the last 11,000 years. We took that for granted as it'll never change. So,
Hmm.
their work was like, yeah, you're trying to prove something that we already know. But now their work becomes a lot more important. The work of the one person I quote, with those planetary limits, Johann Rockström from the Potsdam Institute. Those are people in the turquoise sciences. Those are people who are
Yeah.
telling us linear science doesn't work. Linear thinking doesn't work. Exponential thinking has to be understood in order for us to understand the planet, in order
Hmm.
for us to understand how collapse works and how larger systems than the ones that are human made, that are still, when compared to how natural system works, everything that we created with all its complexity looks very, very linear, because man-made systems are here, and as far as the size, and then natural systems are up here. The degree of complexity involved in that, especially when you build in feedback loops at every level of that complexity, at every holonic level, from the smallest microorganism to the largest, if you believe in James Lovelock's theory, Gaia hypothesis, Gaia is a living entity. The planet is a living entity. If you believe in that, it's that holonic structure that needs to be understood.
Hmm.
And we're
Hmm.
failing miserably to understand that.
Yeah.
Why? Because the conclusions point, and and I don't want to say that this is an absolute reality. Turquoise science is just emerging. So, it's like the initial stages of the scientific revolution. There are bits and parts of it that still need to be vetted, but because of the complexity of what turquoise science is all about, number one, like you said earlier, people, yeah, the human mind can't absorb it, and so
Mm.
it's a lot easier for them to dismiss it. And issue number two, it hasn't really been vetted, but you look at the track record of when we started keeping track of the parts per million for carbon dioxide, the degree to which the Earth temperature is rising. You look at the last 20, 30 decades alone, and you say whatever we're doing is not working. I mean, these are the
Yeah.
outer these are things that we can simply look at. We
Mhm.
were supposed to not exceed the warning that they gave us.
Famous 2 degree
Yeah,
exactly.
2.5. We went past that. We were not supposed to get there by 2035, but by
Yeah,
2040, I think. We passed that last year.
yeah,
I mean, if that's not a science that we're missing the mark and ignoring it, I don't know what is.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree. Let me ask you a little bit different question that has more to do with us human beings. I remember that Daniel Schmachtenberger, in that talk where he talks about the third attractor, he brings up the statement that he thinks that human beings are genetically rivalrous. Rivalrous, is that the word? So that we genetically are predisposed to compete with each other, and that he says in that talk that this is one of the problems, that as long as we are acting rivalrous and want to outcompete each other, there is not much hope, because then we always get into these multipolar traps that if I don't do this, somebody else does, but then no, I want to compete, I want to win in that game, and therefore we kind of do the orange game of always more and more and more, and also more destruction. So what's your take on this, and also what's your take on what needs to happen in our inner development
Well,
to have a chance
yeah,
for change?
I think that's a very generalized statement. Yes, we are competitive by nature. We are, what was the term that he used?
Rivalrous,
Yeah, rivalist.
rivalrous.
Uh,
Yeah.
I'd defer to the historic record and to Graves's model that says humans, groups, organizations, countries, and the entire species emerges between two general systems. Individualistic systems that do exactly what you're talking about, but then so it human emergence alternates, according to Graves, between
Hmm.
individualistic systems and communal systems.
Yeah.
And so the individualistic systems are the ones that seek change, and it's just a matter as you go up the spiral, change from what to what, you know.
Yeah.
In red, we moved from, destruction and blood to a communal system that was blue, that said, temperance and, the idea that there's higher power should give you temperance to walk you away from that individualistic bloody system called the red system, you know, but
Hmm.
but then we emerged. Blue became so repressive that it repressed the voices of people who think in higher
Oh,
terms, like the orange
yeah.
system. So we emerged into the orange system, and unfortunately, Daniela, what has happened is uh, the way emergence has happened in the first tier is that the individualistic systems go to extremes. Okay,
Yeah.
we don't switch to a communal system till after the individualistic system has destroyed what we have known
Hmm.
and held close to.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it happened in red with with death and wars and everything else, with the conquest, with everything else, till we came to a point where we said, we were all gonna die. There has to be a better way. Whoever still laid there not bloodied and dead, decided that there has to be a better way. Well, Orange is doing the same thing now. Orange
Yeah.
is, we're not only are destroying livelihood of people through inequalities and really a system that is in collapse, that spreads its toxicity on automatic operation. Not only so it's affecting those human built systems, but in addition to that, it's affecting the planetary systems now. And so, to me, this is just the movement of first tier values, reaching, instead of consciously evolving before like orange reaches the tipping point, and then switching to a more conscious green system that says, we understand where orange is now. We're going to incorporate its best practices into the expression that really first and foremost looks at taking care of people instead of, individualistic values comes first. No, social equality comes first. Humanity as a whole comes first. And then you differentiate the rest according to what, a healthy green system says. But then, to listen to Don speak about, what the second tier systems look like, the meshing of the individualistic and the communal begins at the integral stage, at the yellow
Hmm.
stage, meaning that a society that exists in the seventh stage of development harnesses the best use of both. It is still driven by individualistic values because yellow is an individualistic system, but it incorporates, because it is of higher consciousness, it incorporates a lot of what the communal systems have to say. And it makes
Still
them
from green.
absolutely, absolutely. We cannot
Hmm.
merge
Hmm.
into, I keep repeating this to people who, still look at green as the green, as a mean green meme. No, it's not. We need to empower it. Otherwise, we won't move up to the integral stage. And so, the integration begins in yellow, but then when you get to turquoise, both systems become meshed. Both
Hmm.
systems become both individualistic
Hmm.
and communal. So the
Hmm.
idea that we are greedy by nature, yes, that's true to the lower systems. But then when you get to turquoise, which is the stage that we need to come from to save the planet and in the process save humanity, we become that mesh of both. That, yeah, we will empower individuals to become greedy when they need to be greedy, if the purpose of that greed is to say, I'm going to stop you from doing this to the planet, or I'm going to stop
Hmm.
because there needs to be a lot more discipline as we I mean, I really foresee a lot of blue coming into our new system of governance that has been lost, but it'll be a completely different blue that's a part of the turquoise system that says we're not looking for governance anymore for individual countries. We're looking at governance for the entire planet. And
Hmm.
so if that is viewed as a harsh, individualistic view of how the world should operate, it's coming from a place that is informed by the changes that are taking place with the environment. So to me, it's too much of a generalization for me. As consciousness moves up, and as the people who hold the higher consciousness begin to make the decisions and design institutions and organizations from those values, you shouldn't be able to feel the impingement of those individualistic systems. I think Daniel sees that rightfully so, because orange has exhausted everything that we have known. Orange is
Yeah, yeah,
collapsing
exactly.
things left and right. And to me, he's observing the exit stage of that.
Yeah, yeah. But the thing is, Said, every time when I listen to you and when I read your book, I feel like you are making so much sense in all you're saying. And I can't see with my mind how this could be possible. Like this global, I mean, I agree with you. If we had this beautiful global blue thing influencing everything for the better, and we had the bottom up existence of the communal regional things that are happening at the same time, and they could meet each other in the middle. I can see this as a utopian vision. I cannot in my mind see it as a realistic
No,
third attractor. You know what I mean? It's like
yeah, yeah,
it's too
absolutely.
much. It's too much.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's we got to separate theory from reality here, and
Yeah,
Graves was the first to say that. Is like, I can tell you what the emerging system is going to look like, but I will also guarantee you that it's going to look nothing like I'm telling you it's going to look like. Just because, in collapse, I mean, we're, the subject of this is the third attractor, and
yeah,
we are giving it our best shot to make sure that the third attractor happens, but it could very much
exactly.
never going to happen. But it behooves us to commit ourselves to see that vision, to
Yeah,
third attractor, the integral age, the second. I mean, it behooves us to commit ourselves to that. But a system in chaos and collapse, especially a system the size of the planetary systems, once I use a lot of scientific complexity sciences in the book to demonstrate the point that once you reach a tipping point in a system, the outcome on the other side becomes exponentially more complex and
Mm-hmm.
far less predictable than it would have been if we were to address the issues before things got bad. Okay, so it's really looking upstream. In order for us to really have more predictive powers, we have to look upstream and anticipate the problem coming and address it before it happens. We're playing catch up now. So the idea that, yeah, what I'm describing is utopian, is theoretical. The notion of, a whole bunch of other things can manifest is also part of that reality. The one thing that sticks with me, with Don. He was interviewed, God, a few years before he passed, by someone, and they were asking him, you spend your lifetime working in this framework. Is there something that you think you might have gotten wrong about the nature of human emergence? And he says, yeah, sadly, my experience has been we don't change out of conscious will. We
Yeah.
change out of necessity because collapse is hanging over our head. And
Mm-hmm.
so, take that as a guiding principle. So like, we're not, you and I and everybody else, in our community are doing conscious work, but we're not the people in charge of the system who can implement the changes that we're looking to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's in the hands of the dumbest people. I'm sorry to say, but once you're in charge of a system as big as the one that we have, which is like, this that has this global ethos of, still building a global economy based on a carbon footprint, based
Yep.
on the idea that human development, although it's going to consume 200 times more resources than we did 300 years ago, that is still a noble thing to go after, is completely off. Where are the leaders that are going to say, look, the science is telling us otherwise. We can't do this anymore. That
Yeah.
consciousness doesn't exist. It exists between us. We're talking about it. And we
And
want
we
to,
don't have and we don't have the CAPI, as you call it, no?
yes,
You
yes, the
wanna you
coalition.
wanna talk a little bit about CAPI, or
Yeah.
anyway, like the pathway that you would see that could lead us to a better future? Because I want to kind of end on a little bit of more positive note. No, it's great. You know, uh, my friend Hans, you met him. He said, "Oh yeah, please invite Said because he will put the fear into all of us." and and
Daniela,
you
you're
do
not the
this in a
first. You're not the
beautiful way.
first to say that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I'd better soften my tone a little bit.
No, 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 no. It's perfect. I think it's perfect. No, but I really like your approach of the CAPI that we have to have as a potential way to solutions and to access more power and more powerful people to actually have a chance for change.
Yeah, so I'm very thankful for Dr. Atizes for creating that framework at the Aziz's Graduate School. I'm also thankful for Don for knowing how to incorporate it into spiral dynamics, second tier designs, because it really is the application of CAPI on the ground that got me to experience it firsthand. So CAPI comes from corporate life cycles, from Dr. Ichak Atizes' work on corporate life cycles. And it basically is the coalescence of authority, power, and influence. So, in anything that we're doing, if we want to scale it to a certain level, we ask the question of who holds the power, authority, and influence to make that happen.
Hmm.
And so, like, I use the example of when we started doing our work in the Middle East. When we were invited to do the work there, that was one of the very first questions we asked. How much CAPI do we hold in changing the politics of the Middle East? And the answer was very, very, came very quickly. We didn't hold much power. And so,
Hmm.
but we had influence among the very few people who understood spiral dynamics, who understood the work that Don did in South Africa. And so it was with them that we got the invitation to go. And so if you hold CAPI within certain communities, you look to, so we had a little influence. So of the CAPI, we held the I among a very small
Hmm.
part of the
Hmm.
community. And so we began to expand the influence within that community. So, we went from the people who invited us to training about 30 or 40 people on the Israeli side, to know what spiral dynamics is and what, what large scale systems design is all about, and how peace through the lens of stratified democracy, which is a conception, a second tier conception of what democracy should look like, how that will be different than what's going on in the Middle East now. We did the same
Mm-hmm.
with the Palestinians. And over a 6 year period, that grew from that circle of influence to it being a community based movement that gave advice to both the leaders in the moderate Fatah organization in on the Palestinian side, with the blessing of the Israeli government at the time, which was more like center left than where it is now. And so
Mm-hmm.
this is how you influence Gapi. It's you find the lowest scale that you have influence over, and you begin to increase your influence. And if what you're doing is aspirational, it is what the some of those smart leaders think it's going to be next. They offer you the authority and the power to
Mm-hmm.
move forward. So it's those kinds of things. So in my book, with every economic model I explore, I say, who holds power over this? So I just explained the model. I explained what needs to be done. Who holds Cappy to make sure that it's going to happen? And unfortunately, it's been, power to change things are in the hands of people in the lower systems. So what we need to do is look for ways to influence, to increase that influence factor in the CAPI, to get it
Mm-hmm.
to the point where it begins, to create bigger and bigger concentric circles that can influence power and authority. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
people, instead of people getting like discouraged, you look at how you can increase the influence. People ask me, well, what do you do with, climate change is happening? What advice do you give? And, one of the first things that I said when I first talked about this at a major conference is that, tell your kids to stop going to school. Tell them to go out and demonstrate. I mean, if kids at their core feel like there's no future, that that the educational system is part and parcel of the problem, that
Mm-hmm.
empower your kids to create arguments on why they don't want to seek a future that like you and I did. It's the activism that becomes part of the CAPI model that spreads the influence. And as as these activists influence more and more people, the concentric circle grows, the CAPI grows. But unfortunately, as of now, it exists in pockets, and we need to
Yeah.
increase these pockets. And if there's small, distributed systems pockets, that's okay. Because if they all are of similar thinking with their own little unique life conditions, at least they see the problem together. And so joining hands with this becomes an automatic thing that happens naturally. So
Mm-hmm.
if there's a positive note to end it on, it really boils down to in absence of conscious leadership, which is a reality now. Everybody, even the most conscious leaders in the world, are paying lip service to collapse because they don't know. Either they're afraid to stand up to say what how things are going to look like on the other side of collapse, or they just don't want to take the chance of them not being leaders who could see the change. They just don't talk about it. So the
Mm-hmm.
absence of leadership at the highest level is a real thing. And so the only choice that's left is for grassroots to grow, to advocacy at the grassroots, influence as many people as you can so they can grow from just the influence aspect of CAPI to the entire structure of CAPI at a holonic level that grows and grows and grows. And hopefully Mother Nature will be merciful enough to give us time for this to grow.
Give us time for this. Yeah.
you know it's I'd like to end with something that James Lovelock said. The guy who he just passed away a couple of years ago. He was 102 years old, and he was interviewed by the Guardian. He made a statement in his 2006 book, Gaia's Revenge. And he says, Gaia is this old lady in her 80s, and suddenly we're this obnoxious schizoid species, teenage species that took up residence in her home. And we've been so obnoxious that she's ready to evict us,
Yeah.
And so the reporter, in 22 or 23, says, remember that quote? What do you say where we are now? And, the book was going back to 2000. So almost 20 years later, he goes, well, Mother Nature has served us the eviction notice. It's now really up to us to determine what we're going to do. Are we going to
Yeah.
go back into her graces and beg to stay on the planet? And we all
Yeah.
know what that begging means.
Yeah.
Or do we just let her evict us? And so this is where we are.
Mm.
The begging part is what we're looking at. The begging part is do we do the third attractor? Do we keep advocating? And of course we do. I mean, but what other choices do we have, Daniela?
Mhm.
We need to take, it really befalls on us. I mean, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse that, all this is falling on us, the conscious people who need to advocate for this.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way. I mean, too bad that the structures are the way they are and they're concentrated and frozen. And so it really makes our work that much more challenging, but it has to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. I have one last question for you. If you could put one sentence into 8 billion people overnight, one sentence put in their minds, what would be that sentence?
Oh gosh. The tough questions is last.
Yes.
Um, Embrace and understand the natural world because without it, we're doomed. I mean, it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Without that
Thank you
con
so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Daniela. This was
Thank
wonderful.
you. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.